I really did not expect that they would do this. And they, Donald Trump and his counsel asked for this 100% absolute immunity thing, which was insane. I would say they got 105% of what they were asking for. They got immunity from this court, despite some of the language in Justice Roberts' ruling saying that there was some measure of humility here, some measure of restraint. The practical impact of what they have done is to give Trump immunity that even he and his counsel did not ask for. And given that the hypotheticals over the course of these arguments, as you rightly pointed out, included things like, can the president assassinate a rival? I think we have to look at the Supreme Court's affirmative answer to that. Yes, you can. With as much seriousness as it deserves. I mean, this is a death squad ruling. This is a ruling that says that as long as you can construe it as an official or quasi-official act, you can do absolutely anything, and never be held accountable, not only while you are president, but forever.
Mike Breen, you and I went to Yale Law School together. Seems like a lifetime ago, but we were two of the only veterans there. And I never imagined that we would see a day when the Supreme Court hands down a decision that basically says the U.S. military, if ordered by a president in his official capacity, could assassinate political rivals. How did 6 Ivy League educated justices deliver this kind of opinion?
Ken, I don't know. I keep going back and reading this thing, trying to figure out if it's as bad as I think it is. Because I don't want to overreact to it. I'm not the be all and end all on the constitutional interpretation, but it sure looks as bad as I think it is to me on repeated reading. It very clearly seems to say that the president of the United States, because the president is a branch of government, is immune for criminal prosecution, regardless of motive, and motive can't be examined here by courts. They go out of the way to say that. Whatever the president's motivations, they're immune from criminal prosecution for anything they do in their official capacity. And oh, by the way, we're not sure what is official and unofficial in terms of the president's actions. So, they go out of their way to say future courts, lower courts will have to decide what's official and what's not. There's a lot of gray area. But that's it. The president's above the law for all of his official acts. There's a lot to say about this, obviously. But I'm deeply, deeply concerned on a few different levels. First, the obvious. What does this mean for what a president might do with it? Any president in the future may do with it. Second, what does this mean for the rest of the executive branch, the military? What does this mean for military commanders, FBI agents, Border Patrol officers, others who are now the machinery of these official acts? They're going to be the implementers of the president's official acts. There's nothing in here that says that they're not liable for those actions, only the president. So that sounds like a recipe for absolute chaos. And third, as you and I have talked about, I'm deeply worried about the legitimacy of the court, because earned respect for the impartiality and wisdom of the Supreme Court is one of the most important bulwarks we still have to maintaining our democracy. There has to be a branch of government in the court that's viewed as above politics. And I'm deeply concerned that the court's inflicted a self-inflicted wound on itself, this ruling that it may never recover from. I think about the damage to legitimacy the court took after Bush v. Gore, which is trivial if you think about it in comparison to a ruling like this. The court's approval ratings are already at the lowest they've ever been, I believe, in American history. There are a series of ethics scandals underway at the court already. This, I think, is a disaster for the court and a disaster for its legitimacy.
Mike, I want to read for you Justice Sotomayor's dissent, the last paragraph of it. And if memory serves, you've actually worked with her. Put one check mark in the plus column for Yale. I believe she's a Yale law grad. She wrote, "Never in the history of our republic has a president had reason to believe that he would be immune from criminal prosecution if he used the trappings of his office to violate the criminal law. Moving forward, however, all former presidents will be cloaked in such immunity. If the occupant of that office misuses official power for personal gain, the criminal law that the rest of us must abide will not provide a backstop. With fear for our democracy, I dissent." That is historically strong language. I have never read an opinion like that where a justice calls out her colleagues for threatening democracy.
And neither have I. And I don't know that there's ever been a dissent like that. I have tremendous respect, as you know, for Justice Sotomayor as a person and as a justice. I did have the honor of working with her during her Supreme Court confirmation process while it was the White House counsel's office and getting to know her family. She's a tremendous human being. And I think I can say from that experience that I know what she's like under pressure. And under pressure, she is thoughtful and measured, as a justice should be. I have to say I agree with her. I'm also fearful for the future of our democracy given this ruling. The court went far further than it needed to address the issue that was before it. It's an expansive ruling, grants a massive blank check to the executive, and really leaves almost no recourse to the public or to the law for what presidents may do in office. It's hard to understand fully where we go from here.
So, Mike, one of the things I try to be really careful about is undermining the legitimacy of our judicial system. And you see coordinated attacks from the right, especially in the wake of the indictments and convictions of the former president. But we need to make a very clear distinction between how a 12-person jury of one's peers operates, how they're selected, how they are briefed, and the standards they have to abide versus today's Supreme Court. And when we are criticizing a ruling like this, we're calling out hypocrisy, we're calling out overreach. In the case of the jury that convicted Donald Trump, there was no suggestion that any member of that jury was taking bribes for cases that they would review, as there is with the Supreme Court. If they had lied during the evaluation period to seat them on that jury, they wouldn't have just been kicked off the jury. They might have gone to jail. To drive home that point, I want to play these 3 clips of 3 of the sitting justices, Alito, Kavanaugh, and Roberts, who, when questioned during their confirmation hearings, said something entirely different from what they just ruled in this case. Here are the clips.
And there is nothing that is more important for our republic than the rule of law. No person in this country, no matter how high or powerful, is above the law.
The president is subject to the laws. No one's above the law in the United States, including the president of the United States. And that's something that is made clear in Federalist 69. Even in the national security context, where the Constitution gives the commander-in-chief power to the president remains subject to the law.
I believe that no one is above the law under our system, and that includes the president. The president is fully bound by the law, the Constitution, and statutes.
So here you have 3 Supreme Court justices saying that no one's above the law, and that to suggest that that's the case would be unconscionable for any jurist. When we pick apart a decision like this, we are not attacking the legal system. We are talking about what 6 justices decided to do with their power.
Yeah, I think that's right, Ken. And I want to be really careful about attacking the legitimacy of the court too. I mean, I'm not going to comment on. I'm tempted to, but I'm not going to comment on the conduct or motivations of any of the justices. I think on that question, is the president above the law or not? Maybe I'll quote Justice Sotomayor's dissent. She writes, ultimately, the majority pays lip service to the idea that the president, charged with enforcing federal criminal laws, is not above them, but it then proceeds to place former presidents beyond the reach of the federal criminal laws for any abuse of official power. So, they repeatedly say, hey, we're not making a king, we're not placing the president above the law, but for a broad set of circumstances, they've done exactly that. And it's hard to interpret it in any other way. I do want to make a point about the integrity of the judicial system and attacks on it. And this is more about a point about the Department of Justice, which has, these are the men and women at the Justice Department who brought this case against Trump. They're also the men and women who investigated President Biden with respect to classified documents. These are the men and women who brought criminal charges against the president's son, Hunter. The FBI agents, the federal attorneys, the Justice Department officials, they have been savagely criticized from left and right by friends of President Biden and friends of President Trump. And I think what that probably tells us is that we have I know what that tells us, is that we have a Justice Department that is doing its damnedest in an incredibly difficult environment to apply the law in a non-political and non-partisan fashion. And I think we ought to thank them for that, because nobody does. That's not the same thing as the Supreme Court. In some ways, what this ruling says is we're afraid, the majority seems to be afraid, and I'm reading between the lines here a little bit, that the Justice Department is going to be weaponized by presidents against their opponents. And so therefore, the president's got to be placed beyond the reach of the Justice Department, beyond the reach of the criminal law. And they express this, in the majority writes about their fear that the executive is going to cannibalize itself, that every president will throw their predecessor in prison because they'll weaponize the Justice Department. I think that's a set of fears that does a huge injustice to the Justice Department. And again, it leads me to the conclusion, I don't think the court had to do this. I don't think the majority had to put a ruling like this on the table. They could have made a much more narrow ruling and moved on. They didn't. And the consequences, I think, for this are going to be incredibly far-reaching for the military, for the court, for the country, and for every employee of the federal government.
Hi, everyone. It's Ken Harbaugh, and I need to take a short break here to ask all of you watching and listening for a quick favor. I am starting my own YouTube channel at team_Harbaugh, where I'll be posting videos regularly, including bonus content. It's a great place to find both Burn the Boats and Against All Enemies episodes, including the full archive. That's going to take a while to upload, but it's all going to live there. I could really use your help growing the channel. Please consider subscribing today. The link is in the show notes, or just search for team_Harbaugh on YouTube. I really appreciate the support. Everything we do here depends on you. Thanks so much. Well, the consequences for the court could be potentially fatal, given the fact that the court has one thing going for it in our system, which is legitimacy. It doesn't have a budget like Congress. It doesn't have an army like the executive branch. All it has is the confidence of the American people. And when you undermine that with rulings like this, I don't know how you recover that. I'm sure there are historical examples, but it is a long, long process. And now more than ever, we need a court that has legitimacy when it is asked to stand up to executive overreach, as I'm sure it will be asked to do if Trump is reelected.
Yeah, can I agree with that? I mean, I am in some ways more worried about the damage this does to the court and what that means for the court's ability to act as a bulwark in a hyper-partisan environment in the other two branches of government. if there's ever been a time we need a court that has the respect of the American people and that is viewed as above politics and it acts like it's above politics and earns that respect in that way. This is that time, and I think this is a massive self-inflicted wound for the legitimacy of the court. That scares me, and in some ways it scares me more than the space it opens for what an executive might do, as scary as that is. You know, a lot of the conversation, all the conversation about this has been about what this means for the power of the president. I worry about what it means for the usefulness of this court in the defense of our democracy.
My other big fear comes from thinking about how this is actually operationalized. I was having a conversation just today with fellow vets about what this might mean for that captain in uniform who receives an order from a president who's now cloaked in immunity. And you know that's coming if Trump is reelected. He has already tried to get the military to shoot migrants. He's talked about shooting protesters. What happens when that decision comes down to a captain in the 82nd Airborne? I mean, that, and in the conversation I had today, the observation was made that we may be, you know, one person in uniform away from a full-blown constitutional crisis. And thank God we have people in the military who can say no to illegal orders. But it shouldn't come to that. That is not how it's supposed to work in a democratic system where there is an assumption of deference to civilian authority within the military. Now the military is seriously thinking about the orders it will have to disobey. And that's dangerous ground.
Yeah, extremely well said, right? I mean, you and I were both military officers before we went to law school. You know, it was the honor of my life to serve as a military officer. When a democracy is looking to the generals to save it, things have gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, you and I both vividly remember a summer not too long ago when we were hours away from the president deploying the 82nd Airborne Division into the streets of Washington, D.C. to confront largely peaceful protesters. That was a terrifying moment. Part of the reason we got through that was that we had military leaders who found ways to caution, to slow things down, to avoid walking off cliffs that they couldn't get back up onto once they'd done it. You can't count on that happening every time. And then there's the question of what the world looks like for them legally after this ruling. So as I look at this, I mean, you'd have to have other cases follow this ruling. But this provides immunity to the president. It doesn't provide immunity to everybody in the executive branch who acts as the instrument of the president's official duties, right? Imagine you're the commanding general of the 82nd Airborne Division. You get this order. Set your conscience aside for a minute. Not that you ever can. Okay, if I follow this order, I fire on protesters, I'm probably criminally liable for having done this, even though the man ordering me to do it isn't. If I don't do it, the man who just ordered me to shoot the protesters can order me shot and faces no criminal liability for doing that. And this is a disaster for good order and discipline. It creates massive, massive questions, moral hazards all the way up and down the chain of command. Not just for military leaders, Border Patrol agents, FBI, Bureau of Prisons, the endless number of armed agents in all the various agencies of the executive branch may face these exact same questions. So might an IRS investigator. So, you know, do I bankrupt a corporation on the orders of the president? What does that mean for me if I do? This opens, I mean, it just, I think, a terrifying and at this moment, as we sit here today, completely unresolved and untested space for our government and for, you know, thousands and thousands of people who work for it and all of us who are subject to its power.
Yeah. It's worth noting that there was an amicus brief in this case filed by senior military people who made exactly this point about the threat to order and discipline, the incredibly damaging effect this would have on morale, and this 6-justice majority did not obviously consider that important enough to affect their decision on this case. Mike, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much. I'm sure we'll be talking about this a lot in the weeks and months to come.
Thank you, Tim.